They say the 16th century was ruled by faith, famine, and fear. In a remote village in France, people didn't whisper about war or plague. They whispered about something far worse. He was just a hunter, a husband, a man who knew the forest, its sounds, and its shadows better than anyone. But nothing could have prepared him for the night the beast arrived. It took his wife, and with her, it took everything good he had. What he found after that night still haunts him, and if you have the courage to listen, you'll understand why. Today we're going to uncover the legend of the Werewolf of Roche, what this man saw, what he endured, and why this terrifying story still echoes through the centuries. They say this legend gave rise to the creature known as the werewolf, the very origin of the beast of the full moon. Before we dive in, if you've seen something you can't explain or lived through something that still keeps you up at night, tell us. Head over to Ghordan.com. It's free, quick, and maybe your story's next. In a time when the devil was a whisper on the wind and a woman's kindness could be twisted into a mark of the beast, people didn't ask questions, they lit torches. They lit torches against the darkness, against the cold, against anything they couldn't understand. This wasn't a time of reason, it was an age ruled by fear. A fragile epoch where superstition wasn't just a belief, it was law. And in the year was 1573, across the scattered villages of northern France, that law was carved into the hearts of men with an iron claw. They believed in witches, they believed in curses, they believed a shadow moving in the corner of your eye was proof of a pact with something ancient and evil. In those days, when crops withered, they didn't blame the soil. They blamed the woman who knew too much about herbs. When the livestock were found mutilated, they didn't look for wolves, they looked for signs, a mole in the wrong place, a woman humming at dusk, a quiet stranger. And when they found a person guilty or simply feared them enough to make people uneasy, there was only one sentence. A brutal final judgment delivered not by a king or a court, but by the mob. Death by fire. They said the flames purified the soul, that a sinner's screams carried their darkness away to the heavens. But the truth? Most of the time, the people they burned were just victims of ignorance, prejudice, and a fear so deep it smelled of smoke and blood. There was no mercy in those years, no second chances. And in that merciless world, on the edge of a small village called Roche, lived a man named Bastien. He was a hunter, a man of the forest, not a scholar, not a nobleman, just a man whose hands were calloused and whose eyes saw more truth in the tangled roots of an oak tree than in the hollow words of a priest. He lived in a modest wooden cabin, tucked so far into the tree line that the sounds of gossip never reached his ears. But he was close enough that the villagers remembered he existed when they needed meat or a scapegoat. Bastien didn't care for people, not really. He had something most men in that age only dreamed of, something simple, something sacred. He had her. She didn't possess the kind of beauty that turned heads in the marketplace. She had something rarer, something deeper. Stillness, a quiet kindness that made you lower your voice in her presence. People said she had healing hands, that she could calm a crying child or a wounded dog just by touching them. She never spoke ill of anyone, never raised her voice, never missed a Sunday prayer. Some even whispered she was too gentle for this world. Bastien adored her. In a time when marriages were about land and power, theirs was a covenant of silent devotion. He hunted, she kept the hearth warm. They shared bread in silence, a quiet sacrament. They laughed rarely, but when they did, it was the kind of laughter that echoed through the woods, the kind that made neighbors stop and listen, wondering what secret joy could possibly exist in such a somber world. They had no children. Some whispered it was a curse. To them, it was peace. No distractions, no burdens, just the woods, the fire, and each other. The villagers tolerated them. They admired her, feared him, and that suited them just fine. But this was 1573, nothing good could stay untouched for long. Sometimes at night, they'd sit by the fire without saying a word, just breathing together. Outside, the cold wind moved through the trees like a ghost. Inside, her hands would be wrapped around a warm mug, and Bastien would listen to the silence, knowing that for once in his life, he had something no one could take from him. Something good, something pure. They say evil comes when it is invited. Others say it comes when you least expect it. But Bastien knew the truth now. Sometimes evil doesn't come to destroy what you have. It comes to test how far you'll go to protect it. And in the coldest month of that cursed year, the forest began to bleed. The villagers heard the screams of a doe, a sound that made the blood freeze in their veins. But what they found the next morning wasn't a wolf attack. It was a sign. A symbol carved into the dead animal's skin, a mark of forbidden things. A mark of black magic. That winter was different. Something malicious and inexplicable began to show its signs. The cold night and the moonlight seemed to bear witness to an evil presence that stalked near their little house. Bastien knew that as a hunter, waiting was not an option. The beast wouldn't come for him. It would come for those he loved. One cold morning, he kissed his wife's cheek and said, "I'll be back soon, but not before I end this. It's a matter of honor." Then he turned toward the forest, carrying his rifle and the weight of a promise no man should have to keep. Bastien had tracked the creature for 3 nights, 3 nights of frost biting at his skin, the forest groaning under the weight of winter, and the moon watching like a silent judge. The tracks were always there, too wide for a wolf, too deep for a man. The air felt wrong, even the wind seemed to avoid the path he walked. That night, the forest was still. Dead still. No owls, no rustle of branches, only the crunch of his own boots on frozen ground. And then another sound. Heavy, wet, breathing, stepped out from behind the trees. Taller than any man, but not a man, bent forward like it carried an invisible weight, arms long enough to scrape the dirt, claws curved like hooks, eyes burning gold in the moonlight. The breath coming from its chest was deep and deliberate, like it was savoring the space between them. Some predators charge because they're hungry. This one, it waited. It wanted me to see it, to know it had found me before I found it. The charge came without warning. Bastien grabbed the tent cord and yanked. The canvas dropped between them, a sudden wall of confusion. He rolled to the side, seized his rifle, turned and fired. The shot cracked the night in half. The creature's roar was something between man and animal, a sound that seemed to tear at the edges of reality. It clutched its right forelimb, blood pouring dark into the floor, and then it fled, vanishing into the trees. Bastien didn't chase. He gathered his things and walked back toward Roche. The cold was sharper now. The village lights glowed faintly in the distance, but as he drew closer to his home, something in his chest began to twist. The door was shut, the air inside colder than it should have been, the fire had gone out, and there, just inside the threshold, was a drop of blood. At first he thought it was from his own boot, a trace from the hunt, but there were more, small, separate, fresh. The trail led deeper inside, past the table, past the hearth, to the bedroom. She was there, sleeping, face calm, body still beneath the blanket, the kind of peaceful sleep he hadn't had in years. But something was wrong. The smell, coppery, sharp, filled the air. His hands moved before his mind caught up. He pulled the blanket back. Her right hand lay in the open, wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, 2 fingers limp, flesh torn in the same place his bullet had struck the beast. The room tilted around him, the air felt heavier. She didn't wake, didn't move. I've faced men in war, I've stood with my life hanging on a single breath, but I'd never felt fear like this. Not fear of dying, fear of knowing. He sat there, watching her breathe. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like a countdown. Every second, a war between what he knew and what he wished he didn't. The woman he had loved, the one who laughed with him under these same rafters, who kept the fire lit in his absence, was the same thing that had been hunting the village. His throat tightened. His hands shook. He thought of the animals torn apart, the children who wouldn't see another moon, the faces of neighbors lit by fear, and he knew what he had to do. The rest no one saw. By morning, she was gone from his care and in the hands of those who would decide her fate. They say he never spoke a word to her in that final walk, that he didn't look back. And some say that when it was over, Bastien didn't stay to see what happened. He simply turned toward the forest and disappeared. Killing a monster is easy. Loving one, that's the part that will break you. Some endings are quiet. Others leave scorch marks in the earth. But the worst kind are the ones that never really end. They say she was executed that same afternoon, burned in the heart of Roche, the same square where they once bought bread, traded grain, and greeted their neighbors. The pyre was built in hours, no trial, no priest, only judgment and fire. They say Bastien couldn't watch that. As the smoke began to rise, he turned away from it all and walked into the forest, alone. And no one ever saw him again. The house they once shared was left to rot, its windows shattered by wind, its roof devoured by moss, and inside stripped bare. Some say Bastien destroyed everything that reminded him of her. Others believe the villagers did it in fear, burning or burying every scrap she had touched, every cloth, every letter, every trace of her existence. No grave, no cross, no memory, except for her final words before the flames took her. I didn't want to. I tried, but I couldn't stop it. Please, save my husband. He's hurt. Some believed she meant heartbreak, the shattering of a soul watching everything it loved slip away. They called it a metaphor, a poetic confession from a broken woman. But not everyone agrees, because 7 years later, the killing began again. Dogs, cattle, goats, torn apart, bones crushed, flesh ripped in ways no man could manage. Tracks were found, familiar, heavy, wrong. People didn't wait for answers this time. They didn't form hunting parties or light torches. They ran. And Roche emptied not by violence, but by a fear so deep it clung to the skin like smoke and never washed off. The village never came back. The place that once whispered about demons became one of its own ghost stories, forgotten, abandoned, swallowed by vines and time. But one question never left. What happened to Bastien? Did he vanish in the woods and die of grief? Or did something else happen out there? Something only she knew and tried to warn them about? Was Bastien the hunter or the final victim? Or worse, was he both? They say evil never truly dies. Sometimes it just waits. Maybe it still walks under the trees of Roche. And now it's your turn to decide. Was this the tragedy of a village lost to superstition, or the proof that some curses survive the fire? Tell me what you believe down in the comments. If you felt this story crawl under your skin, give it a like. It helps more people discover the shadows we uncover here. And if you're new, subscribe, because out there in the dark, there are many more stories waiting, and some of them might just find you first. Until next time, stay in the light.